The first thing I did after waking up in my second life was end my engagement to Adrian Hale. In the life before this one, I had spent years proving my devotion like it was a job I could never clock out of. I planned his schedule, smoothed over his temper, swallowed my pride whenever he looked through me instead of at me. I told myself love was something you earned with enough patience. Then I got sick. And while I was still breathing, still fighting, Adrian was already choosing flowers for another woman. Serena Wynne. The day my coffin was carried out of the chapel, their wedding march began in another hall. Guests moved from black to white, like it was just a change of scenery. Someone even said, "At least it's a happy ending." It was. Just not mine. So when I opened my eyes again and found myself back at the beginning, the air still clean and full of possibility, I didn't cry. I didn't bargain with fate. I simply cut the thread before it could tighten around my throat. While Adrian ran around, severing ties with the Hale family, threatening to leave, humiliating his grandfather, trying to prove he was brave enough to choose Serena, I went straight to the Hale estate. The old manor sat on the hill like a judge that had seen everything and forgiven nothing. Inside, the scent of tea and polished wood hit me like a memory. In the main sitting room, the family patriarch, Mr. Alistair Hale, waited with a face carved from duty and disappointment. "Clara," he said, voice low, as if speaking too loudly might break the remaining dignity in the room. "Marrying into this family was your grandfather's last request. It's an arrangement decided between our families long ago." He slid a document across the table. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the ink faded but stubborn. A marriage contract. A promise made before I was old enough to speak, but somehow binding enough to shape my entire life. I read it once, twice, then again, slower, as if the letters might change if I stared long enough. They didn't, but something else did. Behind Mr. Hale stood a man in a white shirt so crisp it looked like it had never known a careless moment. He was tall, quiet, and still like he'd learned long ago that silence was safer than hope. Julian Hale, Adrian's uncle. The youngest son, born late, raised with little warmth and even less expectation. In my previous life, he left after Mr. Hale's death and vanished overseas. I remembered him only in fragments. Calm eyes, measured words, a presence that never demanded attention, but always held it. I set the contract down and lifted my chin. "If the wedding is in half a month," I said clearly, "then I'll marry him." The room froze. Even the clock seemed to hesitate. Mr. Hale's brows flew up. "Clara, marriage isn't a game. You and Adrian were promised from birth. You grew up together. How can you suddenly refuse him and choose Julian?" Because I remember Adrian's eyes when I begged him to stay at my bedside. Because I remember the way his hands didn't tremble when he signed the papers that kept me tied to him. Because I remember him telling me, cold as winter glass, that my love was an inconvenience he endured for the sake of his grandfather. But I didn't say any of that. I only said, "Our families agreed I would marry a Hale. The contract doesn't specify which one." Mr. Hale stared at the paper, as if offended by its own loophole. Then his gaze lifted, heavy with reluctant respect. "You're not wrong," he admitted. "But this still requires Julian's consent." My heartbeat stumbled. In my desperation to escape Adrian's nightmare, I had forgotten one simple truth. Julian Hale was a person, not a shield. Julian's eyes met mine. They were steady, unreadable, the kind of eyes that had learned how to endure storms without making a sound. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence pressed in on my ribs. Then he spoke, voice calm, almost gentle. "If you've thought it through," he said, "I have no objections." Mr. Hale exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for years. A smile cracked his stern face. "Good. Then the wedding will proceed as planned. Grand Horizon Hotel is already booked." The door slammed open before he could say another word. Adrian stormed in, anger rolling off him like heat from a fire. His gaze snapped to me first sharp, disgusted, the same look he used to give me whenever I dared to want something. Then he turned to his grandfather. "I won't marry her." Mr. Hale's smile vanished. "Adrian." "This is a modern age," Adrian snapped, loud enough to shake the framed portraits on the wall. "Childhood engagements are feudal nonsense. If you don't let me marry Serena, I'll leave this family and never come back." Mr. Hale slammed his palm on the table. The teacup rattled. "How many times do I have to tell you? That woman had a child out of wedlock. She has no place in this family. Do you know how much ridicule I've endured because of you?" "I don't care," Adrian shouted. "In this life, I will only marry Serena." He shoved past me, shoulder brushing mine like I was furniture. As he reached the door, he glanced back and sneered, venom sweetened by certainty. "Go ahead and cry to Grandpa. It won't change anything. I'm never marrying you. Give up." I watched him leave, and something inside me went utterly still. He still thought I had come here to trap him. He still thought I was chasing. He had no idea that in this life, my greatest wish wasn't to force him to stay. It was to make sure he never had the chance to destroy me again. "If he wants to cut ties with this family over a woman, then let him," Mr. Harrington said, voice like a gavel striking wood. "But he'd better live with what he's chosen." And he did. Caleb Harrington packed a duffel bag, slammed the trunk of his car, and moved into the staff dorms like a martyr auditioning for sympathy. Within days, the whole school knew the story how the heir had given up everything for love, how the poor, misunderstood woman he adored had been treated unfairly. That woman was Hazel Reed. Hazel wasn't just clinging to Caleb anymore. She was blooming beside him everywhere. In the cafeteria, I'd see them shoulder to shoulder, her laugh spilling like honey across the tables. His gaze stuck to her face like she was the only light in the room. Colleagues who cared about me whispered their outrage between bites of lunch. "Claire, it's disgusting," Miss Monroe hissed, leaning in so no one else could hear. Mr. Harrington brought Hazel into our school as a substitute, and now they're practically attached at the hip. Anyone who didn't know the background would think she's the bride. I kept my fork moving and smiled faintly, as if they were gossiping about strangers. "It doesn't matter," I said softly. They stared at me like I was in denial, but I wasn't. In 2 weeks, I was marrying Adrian Harrington, Caleb's uncle, the man I'd chosen like a door out of a burning house. I had no intention of dragging myself through mud before stepping into a new life. I had learned the hard way that drama was a currency that only ever made other people rich. Besides, since I wasn't marrying Caleb, I didn't have to stay in the townhouse Mr. Harrington had prepared for the couple. Out of guilt and decency, he'd let me live there alone because it was close to the campus and tucked inside a safe neighborhood. Now that the arrangement had shifted, that kindness felt like a borrowed coat. Warm, but not mine. So I went back after school to pack. The moment I walked into the building, I knew something was wrong. My boxes, my books, my winter coats, my framed certificates. Even the small wooden jewelry case my grandmother had left me had been tossed into the hallway in a messy pile, half open, like someone had rummaged through my life with impatient hands. Then the front door to the townhouse clicked open. Hazel stepped out as if she owned the air. She wore a floral dress that tried too hard to look innocent. Her arms were crossed. Her posture was the posture of a hostess greeting an unwanted guest. "Oh," she said, fake surprise widening her eyes. "You're back." Her gaze slid over the heap of my belongings, then returned to my face, calm, pleased, unapologetic. "I'm so sorry," Hazel continued, voice sweet as syrup. "But Caleb asked me and my daughter to move in. The dorms are crowded, and the apartment blocks are even worse. There wasn't enough space, so I put your things in the hallway for now." For now, as if I was someone who could be postponed. "You know how hard it is," she added, tilting her head. "Caleb couldn't bear seeing us struggle, so he asked you to move out. I hope you don't mind the inconvenience." In my first life, This exact scene had cracked me open. Back then, I had screamed. I had cried. I had demanded to know how he could bring another woman into our new home and shove me out like trash. His answer had been a cold laugh that burned worse than tears. "We're not even married yet," he'd mocked. "When did you get the right to decide anything about a Harrington property?" This time, I felt nothing. No heartbreak. No disbelief. Not even rage. Just a quiet, clinical understanding. Hazel and Caleb weren't stealing anything from me. They were taking garbage I had already thrown away. I stepped around the boxes and began gathering my things, folding clothes, stacking books, lifting frames with careful hands. I didn't give Hazel the satisfaction of a reaction. My silence unsettled her. "You're not jealous?" Hazel blurted, disbelief sharp in her tone. "Aren't you scared Caleb will marry me instead of you?" I paused, looked up, and let my eyes go cold. "You and him?" I said, voice flat. "A snake and a dog. A match made in heaven." Hazel's face flushed scarlet. Tears sprang up so quickly it was almost impressive. "Who are you calling?" she shrieked, the performance swelling on cue. Right on schedule, Caleb appeared in the doorway behind her, like he'd been waiting for the signal. He took one look at Hazel's tears and decided the whole story without asking a single question. "Claire," he barked, "she only asked you to move out temporarily. Did you really have to bully her? Or are you just after the Harrington money and can't stand losing your meal ticket?" I didn't argue. A man like Caleb didn't need facts. He only needed a narrative that made him the hero. I lifted the last box, turned, and walked toward the stairs. Behind me, his voice chased like a whip. "Don't get any ideas," he shouted. "A woman like you doesn't stand a chance of marrying me, and I'm not coming to your wedding in 2 weeks. You can count on being humiliated." I didn't look back. I moved into the staff dorms that night and avoided them both, as if they were smoke poisonous, clinging, eager to choke the lungs. But rumors don't need permission. Every hallway glance felt weighted. Every whispered conversation stopped when I passed. Pity, curiosity, judgment. People served them in silence like cold tea. A week later, the principal summoned me to his office. He looked grim as he gestured to a letter on his desk. "Miss Lane," he said, using my last name like it was already stained. "Someone has filed a report accusing you of plagiarism in the faculty writing competition. This is serious. The district is paying close attention." For a second, the room tilted. Plagiarism? My voice came out too sharp. Every word in that article was mine. Who did I allegedly plagiarize? The principal exhaled, frustrated. The accuser provided drafts and outlines as evidence. Even if I wanted to suppress this, I can't. I strongly suggest you take a few days off while we investigate. The words hit like thunder. I left his office numb until I stepped into the corridor and saw Hazel leaning against the wall near the corner, arms folded, that same floral dress, that same satisfied smile curling at her mouth. In that instant, everything clicked. Most of my belongings had been left at the townhouse. My drafts, my notes, my outlines for the competition. And the only person with access to them now was Hazel. I walked up to her, slow and steady, and stared straight into her smug eyes. "It was you," I said. Hazel didn't even pretend to be offended. When she saw no one was around, her smile widened into something ugly. "Yes," she admitted, like she was confessing to stealing candy. "It was me. So what? Your fault for leaving your things lying around." My hands trembled. Fury crawling up my spine like fire. Hazel's eyes shone brighter. "You took my man," she whispered, voice low and vicious. "So don't blame me for taking your job. If you don't leave, how am I supposed to get promoted from substitute to full-time teacher?" So that was what it was. Not a misunderstanding, not a process, not a investigation. It was a theft polished, stamped, and dressed up as justice. Before I could say another word in the hallway, Principal Hart called Hazel Reed into his office. The door closed. the glass panel frosted, and I was left standing there with my reputation bleeding out in slow motion. I filed an appeal that same afternoon. I brought screenshots, timestamps, the old USB copy I always kept in my bag. I wrote a statement so detailed my hand cramped. I went to the district office and sat under fluorescent lights until my eyes burned. The response was a smile without warmth. "We already have proof your work matches an original submission," the administrator said. "All you can do now is wait for the decision." The decision didn't take long. I was fired. Principal Hart wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. "If it weren't for your prior contributions," he muttered, "we would have made an example of you in a public disciplinary meeting." How elegant. How clean. The real author was erased, and the thief was rewarded. That evening, Caleb Harrington hosted a celebratory dinner for Hazel's promotion, a welcome to the faculty party, with wine, laughter, and a private room full of people eager to clap for a lie. I wasn't invited. I went anyway. I walked into the restaurant wearing a calm expression and a fury so sharp it felt like a blade against my ribs. The room smelled of expensive perfume and roasted meat. Hazel sat at the center like a queen, her hair curled, her lips glossy, her eyes bright with victory. I didn't shout. I didn't announce myself. I picked up a glass of red wine from a passing tray and poured it over her head in one smooth motion. The wine soaked her curls, slid down her cheeks, stained her floral dress a dark, sticky crimson. For a heartbeat, there was silence, pure, stunned silence. Then the room erupted. Hazel screamed. People jumped back. Caleb surged to his feet and grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt, hauling me out of the room like I was the criminal. Outside the private hallway, his face twisted with righteous disgust. "Are you insane?" he snapped. "It's just a teaching position. Hazel is a single mother. Do you have any idea how hard her life is? Can't you just let her have it?" He leaned closer, voice dropping into that familiar, poisonous tone, the one that always made me feel small in my last life. "And if you still want to marry me," he added, "stop making things difficult for her." My vision went cold. So he knew. He had known from the beginning that I was the one who'd been stolen from, and the ease with which he defended Hazel, the confidence in his eyes, told me something worse. He had likely helped her fabricate the proof. My hand moved before my mind finished the thought. The slap cracked across his face, sharp and final. "Caleb Harrington," I said, voice steady. "You make me sick." He stared at me, stunned, then laughed under his breath like my disgust was a child's tantrum. "I wouldn't marry you in 1,000 lifetimes," I added. Caleb dismissed it with a smirk, as if devotion was a chain he could yank whenever he pleased. 3 days later, he showed up at my old apartment. The crowded tenement courtyard was loud with children and laundry lines and the metallic clatter of dinner pots. Caleb looked out of place, too polished, too proud, like a luxury car parked in an alley. His expression was uneasy, but only in the way of a man forced to step into inconvenience. "Claire," he said, "Hazel just wanted to stay at the school so badly that she acted impulsively and took your drafts. I'm here to apologize on her behalf." "On her behalf? Not for me. Never for me." Then he shifted, eyes narrowing like he was bargaining at a market. "Hazel's been reported for getting her position through backdoor connections," he said. I admitted I pulled some strings, but she has the ability to hold her job, doesn't she? I stared at him until the air felt heavy. "Ability?" I repeated softly. "You mean the ability to accept bribes from parents? The ability to turn a blind eye to rich kids who bully everyone else?" He flinched, then tried again. Desperation sharpening his tone. "If you come forward and confirm Hazel wrote that article and that you plagiarized it, she can stay," he pleaded. The first apology Caleb ever offered me was a weapon aimed at my throat. "Get out," I said, turning my face away. The day after tomorrow was my wedding to Dominic Harrington. There were fittings, signatures, seating charts. I didn't have time to babysit Caleb's guilt, but he didn't leave with dignity. His pride snapped like a dry branch. It was you who reported her, wasn't it? He accused, voice rising. Claire Bennett, you're despicable. Then he delivered the line like a gift. If you help her this one time, he said, I'll agree to marry you. Think carefully. To him, marrying me was charity. To me, marrying him was death. The next day, a close colleague insisted on taking me out. Foreigners love their bachelorette parties, she teased. Let me give you one too. I let her. I needed 1 hour of pretending life wasn't a battlefield. At the restaurant, as I walked toward the restroom, I heard a familiar voice through the thin wall of a private room. Caleb's. If it weren't for Hazel, I'd never agree to marry that woman, he said, drunk on cheap wine and arrogance. Just looking at her makes me sick. My fingers tightened around the doorframe. I peeked through the narrow crack. Caleb had an arm around Hazel's waist. Hazel blushed, leaning into him like she'd won the universe. Friends crowded around them, laughing, cheering, teasing. Don't worry, Caleb promised, voice thick with devotion. I'll never love anyone but you. Marrying her tomorrow is just to placate my grandfather and keep you in the school. For a second, something sharp pricked my chest. Not because I still loved him, but because even after everything, hearing yourself reduced to that woman still stings. Then the sting turned to clarity. So this was Caleb in his 20s, arrogant, foolish, shameless. And I had spent decades chained to that in my first life, calling it marriage. A bitter smile rose on my lips as I whispered to myself, Caleb, your presence at tomorrow's wedding won't be needed. The next day, my wedding proceeded exactly as planned. Grand Horizon Hotel glittered with chandeliers and polished marble. Guests arrived in silk and diamonds, offering congratulations that tasted like curiosity. They expected one groom. They found another. Dominic Harrington stood beside me in a tailored suit, calm as a storm's eye. He didn't look like a man marrying out of obligation. He looked like a man who had made a decision and would stand by it. People stared, startled, but the Harrington name kept their mouths politely shut. Then the doors swung open. Caleb arrived late, reeking of alcohol, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Hazel glided in behind him in a long red dress that screamed for attention, a deliberate echo of humiliation from my past life. Caleb's face went blank when he saw Dominic at my side. Uncle Dominic, he stammered. Dominic lifted an eyebrow, voice cool. Because I'm the groom. What did you expect me to wear? His gaze swept over Caleb's rumpled shirt, the liquor on his breath. And you, Dominic added, unhurried. Are you trying to embarrass the family? You look like you crawled out of a bar. Caleb's eyes widened, panic crashing through his features. What is this? He demanded, voice shaking. Isn't today my wedding day? A low, icy chuckle cut through the room. Mr. Harrington struck his cane against the floor, thud. Thud each sound like a verdict. You didn't want to get married, he said. Now you've gotten your wish. What are you complaining about? Caleb turned on me, fury and disbelief twisting together. Did you say something to Grandpa? He spat. Did you trick them? I knew you couldn't be trusted. Before I could answer Caleb's accusation, Dominic stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room itself seemed to straighten when he moved, as if his presence carried its own gravity. He placed himself squarely in front of me quietly, protectively, like a wall that had decided what it would and wouldn't allow. Watch your tone, Dominic said, each word measured. Claire Bennett is not someone you address like that. Caleb blinked, thrown off balance. And by seniority, Dominic continued, gaze cutting like clean steel. You should be calling her Aunt. Caleb stumbled back a step, shock widening his eyes. Hazel, clinging to his arm in a dramatic red dress, nearly toppled with him. For half a second, Hazel's face lit up with hope, as if the world had just handed her the ending she'd been practicing in mirrors. Caleb, she breathed, voice trembling with excitement. This is wonderful. If your grandfather isn't forcing you to marry her, then we can finally get married. The words weren't love. They were hunger, the kind that wore perfume and innocence, like a disguise. Mr. Harrington's mouth curled in contempt. Not just anyone marries into this family, he said coldly. And if you think you can bring a woman like her into my house, over my dead body. Hazel's smile shattered. Tears spilled instantly, rehearsed and strategic. She pressed her lips together and turned her face up to Caleb like a wounded saint. You promised me, she sobbed. How can you let them insult me like this? Caleb hesitated, torn between his pride and Hazel's theatrics, between the family name he claimed to despise and the inheritance he still wanted. Around us, whispers started to bloom like mold. Isn't that Hazel Reed? The one who disappeared years ago? I heard she came back pregnant. Didn't her parents die right after the scandal? Some people said it broke them. And now she's trying to marry into the Harringtons? Does she even know her place? Hazel's face flushed a furious red. She stamped her foot, then turned and ran out of the ballroom, covering her face with both hands as if the tears were real and not a weapon. Only then did Caleb seem to remember the larger humiliation happening in front of everyone. He spun back toward Mr. Harrington, voice shaking with anger. Why didn't anyone tell me the groom changed? He demanded. Why wasn't I informed? Mr. Harrington's glare could have frozen fire. I called your school, he said sharply. More than once. You refused to answer because you thought I was still forcing you to come back. I sent letters. You returned every single one. Caleb's complexion drained so quickly he looked ill. He stood there, frozen, as if his own arrogance had finally cornered him. Then, true to form, he made the only choice that protected his ego. He chased after Hazel. The disruption didn't derail the wedding. If anything, it sharpened it. Guests who'd come for gossip found themselves faced with Dominic's calm authority, with Mr. Harrington's iron stance, with the undeniable fact that I wasn't the abandoned bride this time. I was the bride who had chosen. That night, the hotel suite glowed with soft light and red silk sheets. The city glittered beyond the window like scattered diamonds. My cheeks still felt warm from the day's chaos, but my mind was clear. I finally asked the question that had been lodged behind my ribs all week. Was it you, I said quietly, who reported Hazel to the district? There was no one else who could have moved that fast, cut that deep, and left no room for her to wriggle out. Dominic had the reach, the name, the connections. Dominic didn't deny it. He simply nodded, as calm as if he'd said he'd ordered tea. You married me, he replied. I won't let you be wronged again. Something in my chest loosened, something I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I also spoke to the school, Dominic added, voice steady. If you want, you can return whenever you're ready. His words should have comforted me. They did, but they also made me pause. It wasn't fear of facing Caleb again. I'd faced him for decades in my first life and only now understood the truth. What exhausted me wasn't teaching. It was living a life I'd never chosen. I don't think I want to go back, I admitted, the confession tasting strange on my tongue. I want to apply to a newspaper instead. I watched Dominic carefully. In my past life, men like Caleb treated a wife's ambition like an inconvenience. I had expected Dominic to at least hesitate. He didn't. Do what you like, he said simply. If it makes you happy, go for it. And if it doesn't work out, his gaze held mine, steady and certain. I'm here. That support felt unfamiliar, like sunlight, after years underground. The next morning, encouraged, I slid my prepared manuscript into the narrow slot of the newspaper's submission box. If they accepted it, it would give me an edge in the interview process. A door. A new world. Walking past a department store, I suddenly remembered Dominic's closet. Row after row of white shirts. Immaculate and identical, as if he'd never allowed himself the luxury of choice. On impulse, I went into a fabric shop to pick out something softer, something with colour. And of course, fate had a sense of humour. Caleb and Hazel were there. Hazel clung to Caleb's arm, chin lifted, playing house in public. Her finger tapped the exact fabric I'd just chosen. "This one," she said to the clerk. "Wrap it up for me." My mood soured instantly. Even the fabric looked dull now, contaminated by their touch. I slipped the coupon back into my pocket and smiled politely at the clerk. "Give it to her," I said. "Some people only feel alive when they're taking something." Hazel bristled like a cat struck against the grain. "Don't act high and mighty," she snapped. "You weren't so dignified when you were chasing Caleb like a lovesick puppy." I glanced at Caleb, slow and deliberate, letting my gaze travel over him like I was assessing an object I no longer wanted. "Charming," I murmured with a faint, cutting smile. Caleb's expression darkened. "Don't get too full of yourself," he said. "You only married my uncle because of that old contract." He pulled Hazel closer, as if claiming her proved something. "Hazel's different," he insisted loudly. "She loves me for who I am. She doesn't care about my family's wealth." In the corner of my eye, I caught Hazel's fleeting stiffness, the microsecond of awkwardness, before she smoothed it away. She leaned into him with a sweet smile, eyes bright. "We should thank you, Claire," Hazel said, voice syrupy. "Without you, Caleb and I couldn't have ended up together. We're family now. When the baby arrives, don't forget to come celebrate." Her hand drifted to her stomach, gentle and possessive, a threat dressed as a blessing. I couldn't help it. A laugh slipped out quiet, sharp. "And here I thought snakes might learn," I said coolly. "Is having a child out of wedlock supposed to be something you brag about? A few decades ago, both of you would have been dragged into jail for the scandal you're parading around." Hazel's face tightened, Caleb's jaw clenched. I walked past them without another word. True to his nature, it didn't take long for Caleb to start pestering Mr. Harrington again, demanding permission to marry Hazel. Mr. Harrington's roar shook the house, anger stealing his breath. "As long as I'm alive, that woman will never set foot in my home." Caleb stood stubborn as a spoiled child. "Grandpa, it's modern times. People believe in free love. Besides, Hazel is carrying my child. That baby is a Harrington." Instead of softening, Mr. Harrington's fury sharpened into something lethal. "A child conceived in shame," he spat. "That's not an heir, that's a bastard. How did this family raise someone so shameless?" His cane came down hard against Caleb's leg. "If you're determined to marry her, then get out of my house," he thundered. "And don't ever come back." Caleb was thrown out, and in the small house that had once been prepared for me, he held a tiny wedding with Hazel. No dignity, no family, no blessing, only a few drinking buddies, clapping too loudly to cover the sound of a future collapsing. In his old life, Nathan Carver had lived off a single thing, the way spoiled heirs live off inheritance, other people's respect. It wasn't his talent that opened doors. It wasn't his character. It was the Carver name. But once he cut ties with the family, the world stopped bowing. The first cracks appeared in small places. In the market, where shopkeepers stopped offering Mr. Carver's discount. In restaurants, where waiters no longer rushed to his table. At school, where colleagues who once smiled too widely now only nodded out of politeness. And at home, where the woman he'd chosen over everything began to measure him like a failed investment. Faye Morgan, once sweet, once fragile, grew sharper by the day. "You call yourself a man?" she snapped one evening, holding up a cheap piece of fabric like evidence in a trial. "Your teacher salary can't even buy a decent length of cloth." Her complaints didn't stop. They multiplied. Food, rent, diapers, her daughter's school fees, Nathan's paychecks, became her punching bag. Her love, once loudly advertised, turned into constant, grinding resentment. It didn't take long before Nathan did what all prideful men do when reality humiliates them. He crawled back. He showed up at the Carver estate, face pale, shoulders hunched, begging for forgiveness like a penitent outside a temple. The iron gates didn't open. A security guard delivered Mr. Carver's message without emotion. "You can come back with the child," the guard said. "But that woman will never step through these doors." Nathan stood outside the gates, frozen, as if the sentence had physically struck him. He didn't even have the dignity to argue. He just looked smaller, like the world had finally revealed his true size. While his life collapsed, mine quietly rebuilt itself. A letter arrived at my new address, clean white paper, crisp font, the kind that didn't carry gossip or cruelty. "Congratulations, you've been hired. Start date, next month." The newspaper. My hands trembled when I read it. Not from fear this time, from relief. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I had something that was mine, earned by me, not borrowed from a man's status, not chained to a family's contract. Without Nathan in my orbit, the world felt brighter, freer, like I'd been living underwater and finally surfaced. Then, one afternoon, walking home from work, I overheard 2 colleagues whispering behind me, "Did you hear? That Carver grandson got cheated on." Yeah, they said the guy was the principal from the school next door. Caught in bed. No clothes. The wife walked in and screamed loud enough to wake the whole block. I couldn't stop the smirk that tugged at my mouth. Karma was never fast in my first life. It always arrived late, if it arrived at all. But this time, it came like a storm. The principal's wife, fierce, furious, had dragged the scandal into daylight. She sat on the floor in the hallway and wailed like a siren, making sure every neighbor heard every detail. She made sure Faye's name stuck to the walls. And the truth was obvious to anyone who bothered thinking. Faye had slept with the principal because Nathan's salary couldn't support her, her daughter, and the baby swelling beneath her dress. She wanted back into the school system. She wanted a job with benefits, leverage, protection. She wanted her old ladder back. It didn't work. The principal was fired on the spot. Rumors of inappropriate relationships and abuse of position spread faster than any official statement. Faye, pregnant and jobless, was hauled to the police station for questioning, then released with nothing but a warning and a scolding because no one wanted the headache of arresting a pregnant woman. But the principal's wife wasn't finished. She came to Nathan's dorm building with a bucket of filth and a voice like a curse. She threw waste at his door. She screamed insults until the windows rattled. She humiliated them with every disgusting trick vengeance could invent. Nathan, already drowning in shame, finally broke. He returned to the Carver estate and dropped to his knees. "Grandpa," he said, voice cracked and raw, "I was wrong." Mr. Carver's face remained hard, but his eyes softened, just a fraction, only because blood was blood. Even when it disappointed you, Nathan was allowed back in. Not welcomed. Allowed. And now, living under the same roof as the man who once ruined my life, I felt something strange. Nothing. He approached me one evening in the hallway, awkward and hollow-eyed. "Evelyn," he said, using the name I'd chosen in this life, voice heavy with regret. I didn't realize Faye was that kind of woman. He looked older than he should have, like humiliation had carved 10 years into his posture. His shoulders slumped. His confidence had evaporated. "It's in the past," I replied lightly. I surprised myself by meaning it. Once, I would have hated him enough to shake. Now, standing beside my husband Vincent Carver doing work I loved, building a life that didn't revolve around Nathan's moods, I realized hatred required care. Indifference was cleaner. Nathan swallowed hard. "I know you and Uncle Vincent don't have real feelings," he said quickly, desperate to rewrite reality into something he could control. "The mistakes I made, let's fix them. We were childhood sweethearts. If you divorce him, I can." I cut him off so sharply the air went quiet. "Do you think I'm an object?" I asked, voice cold. "Something you can summon when you're lonely and discard when you're bored." His face tightened. "How pathetic," I continued, meeting his eyes without flinching. that only after you're abandoned and humiliated, you remember I exist. Nathan's lips parted, but no words came. I'm happy, I said firmly. And who says I don't have feelings for Vincent? He's 1,000, no, 10,000 times better than you. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. And next time we meet, I added, remember your place. Address me as Aunt. I turned and walked away without another glance. Living under the same roof as my ex-fiancé wasn't ideal. I planned to speak to Vincent about moving out quietly, cleanly, without feeding the gossip machine. As I rounded the corner, strong arms suddenly pulled me into a warm embrace. Vincent. His voice was low, resolute. I blinked, startled. How long have you been listening? He didn't answer, but the faint redness on his ears told me enough. I couldn't resist. Are you jealous? Vincent's grip tightened slightly, as if that was his reply. The move went smoothly. Mr. Carver, surprisingly understanding, didn't object when Vincent informed him. But just as we were finalizing the move, chaos arrived at the estate gates like a curse in human form. Nathan Carver, get out here! Faye's voice sliced through the air, shrill, piercing, desperate. Her belly was round now. Her floral dress strained awkwardly over her swollen frame. You're responsible for my pregnancy, she screamed. You left me alone and pregnant, have you no shame? If you don't come out, I'll report you for harassment. I'll barge in if I have to. Who would dare stop a pregnant woman? The guards exchanged troubled glances, but held the line. Faye stepped forward, ready to launch into another tirade. And Nathan finally appeared. The moment he saw her, his face went red with rage. You dare show your face here, he snarled. You've been disgracing yourself, and now you come to my family's home. Faye laughed, sharp, ugly, honest. Disgracing myself? She shot back. Everything I did was for our family. Do you think I would have stayed with you if you weren't a Carver? The words hit Nathan like a slap. You're nothing, she continued, voice rising. Trash cast out by your own kin. If I can't go back to teaching, how are we supposed to survive on your measly salary? Should we starve? Nathan stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. I watched for a moment, then lost interest. Their tragedy was loud, pathetic, and predictable. I turned to leave. That's when Faye darted toward me. Her fingers clamped around my arm with surprising strength. Evelyn, she hissed, nails biting. This is your doing, isn't it? You're the reason, mister. Carver won't let me in. My pulse spiked. I glanced around for Vincent, but he wasn't in sight. Let go, I demanded. What are you talking about? Faye's eyes gleamed with venom. Seeing me like this must make you happy. She spat. Just because you married Vincent doesn't mean you're better than me. We're both women climbing through men. If I'm miserable, don't think you'll have it easy either. Then she shoved me. Hard. The world tilted. My foot caught the edge of a stone step. Pain flashed white behind my eyes as my head struck the rock. Darkness swallowed everything. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw was Vincent's face tight with guilt, shadowed with exhaustion. Stubble roughened his jaw. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept. You're awake, he said, voice strained. I'm sorry. I should have protected you. I swear I'll never let anything happen to you again. Are you in pain? Does your head still hurt? It was the first time I'd heard him speak so many words at once. Despite everything, I smiled faintly and tried to sit up. Vincent jumped up at once, fumbling to adjust my pillow. Hand me water. Tuck the blanket tighter like he could stitch me back together with care. I couldn't resist teasing him. It was just a fall. Worst case, I'll have a scar. His face flushed deeply. He hesitated, then finally blurted, voice trembling with something bright and terrifying. You're about to become a mum, he said. You have to take care of yourself. The room went still. My heart slammed against my ribs. What did you just say? I whispered. Are you serious? Vincent nodded again and again, joy shining through his fear. We're having a baby. The realization hit me like sunlight through storm clouds. In 2 lifetimes, this was the first time I'd ever carried life. Happiness surged so intensely it felt unreal. Then 3 knocks at the door. Vincent's body tensed. "Uncle Vincent!" Nathan's voice called from outside, tight and urgent. "I need to talk to her." Vincent looked at me, silent, asking permission. I gave Vincent a small, steady nod. He didn't want to leave my side, not after what had happened, but he understood I needed air. Reluctantly, he stepped out, closing the door softly behind him. Just before it shut, I caught a glimpse of a dark coat edge hovering at the corner of the hallway. Nathan. He waited a full second, as if deciding whether pride or desperation would win. Then he stepped inside, shoulders tense, eyes shadowed, his voice thick with something that almost sounded like guilt. "Evelyn, I'm sorry," he said. "I never imagined Faye would hurt you like that." I didn't answer. I just looked at him, quiet, unreadable, the way you look at a stranger who used to be a storm in your life. Nathan took my silence for permission and kept talking, words spilling faster, as if he could talk his way back into a past that had already been buried. "I know I've done so many things to hurt you," he said, swallowing hard. "These past few days, I've been thinking about everything between us, and I finally realized your worth." He paused, eyes flickering to my face, hoping for a crack. "But it's too late," he added, voice turning hoarse. "I know it is." His confession barely landed, because I had already said everything I needed to say the last time we spoke. Nathan should have understood by now. When I decide something, I don't change my mind. Especially not now, especially not when I was carrying Vincent's child. So I waited. And sure enough, the apology wasn't the real reason he came. Nathan's jaw tightened. His gaze dropped, then lifted again, raw with desperation. "I know you won't forgive me," he said quickly, "but I'm begging you. Please help Faye. Grandpa is furious. Her life is going to be miserable from now on, but she's pregnant with my child." He stepped closer, voice cracking. "That baby is a Carver. Please, Evelyn, talk to Grandpa on her behalf. Just once." There it was. Not remorse. Not accountability. A request. A demand dressed up as regret. His eyes were wet, his face strained, his pride visibly bleeding. For a flicker of a moment, I felt something like pity. Nathan hadn't just been betrayed, he'd been made a public fool. But pity didn't mean protection. A small, humorless chuckle slipped out of me. Hope sparked in his eyes, bright and stupid, like a man who still believed I existed to save him. Then I extinguished it. "Since you're my nephew," I said calmly, letting the title cut like glass, "I'll give you advice as an elder." Nathan blinked. "You should get a paternity test," I continued. "And if that isn't possible, you might want to get your own health checked." The colour drained from his face. "What?" he stammered. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer, because I remembered. In my first life, even without love, Nathan and I had still lived as husband and wife behind closed doors. We had shared a bed. We had shared years. And yet, we never had children. It wasn't because of me. It was because of him. Nathan Carver couldn't have children. So when I learned back then that Faye was pregnant, I knew immediately. He had been deceived so completely, it was almost cruel. In my old life, I stayed silent. I told myself it wasn't my business. But this time, Faye had put her hands on me. She had shoved me, tried to break me, tried to poison my marriage and my unborn child. So, no, I had no reason to stay quiet. Nathan laughed once, brittle and forced. "That's ridiculous," he snapped, as if volume could erase biology. "You're just trying to mess with me." He pressed for answers. He demanded explanations. He tried to corner me into giving him proof. I gave him nothing, and the longer I stayed silent, the more unstable he became. His breathing sped up. His eyes darted. His hands flexed like he didn't know where to put them. Finally, his composure shattered. He backed toward the door as if the room had suddenly grown claws. Then he turned and ran out, stumbling down the corridor like a man chased by his own thoughts. The next time I heard Nathan's name, it wasn't from family. It was from the newspaper. The headline was brief. The details were colder than winter. Nathan had killed Faye in the small house that was once meant to be ours. Then he had set the place on fire and died with her. By the time anyone found them, it was already too late. People whispered that Nathan wouldn't have gone that far, wouldn't have chosen such an ending if he hadn't been pushed beyond pride. But when he confronted Faye, she screamed about his infertility so loudly the entire neighborhood heard. Within days, the scandal spread through the city like smoke. Nathan couldn't endure being laughed at, and in the end, he chose annihilation over humiliation. Mr. Carver had to bury his grandson. After the funeral, he looked older overnight, like grief had poured ash into his veins. Vincent and I offered to bring him to live with us, to care for him the way family should. He refused. "It's enough," he said quietly, eyes fixed on a place far away. "Just visit when you can." Years passed, and one afternoon, sitting in a sunlit room with a little girl on my lap, I felt a small hand tug my sleeve. My granddaughter tilted her head, pigtails bouncing, eyes wide with that innocent curiosity that makes the world feel new. "So, that's why Grandpa's cane is so scary?" she asked softly. Before I could answer, a voice called from the kitchen, warm and familiar. "Stop telling ghost stories and come eat," Vincent said. "I made your favorite sweet and sour fish." I smiled, brushing my granddaughter's cheek with my fingertips. "Come on," I told her, taking her tiny hand. "Dinner's ready." As we walked out, I saw Vincent standing there with a platter in his hands, smiling at me the way sunlight smiles at morning, steady, quiet, real. And in that moment, I knew the past had finally lost its grip.